Hello,
Hey, John.
everyone, and welcome to the first Gen Live of 2021 on a very auspicious day, Inauguration Day for the new administration. So thank you very much for joining us and tearing yourself away from the screen where we've been watching history being made. I'm Kevin Davis, editor-at-large with Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News, executive editor of the CRISPR Journal, and the author of the new book, Editing Humanity, the CRISPR Revolution and the New Era of Genome Editing. I'm joined by three of my colleagues who most of you will have met before: Juliana Lemure, Dr. Juliana Lemure, Alex Philippidis, and John Sterling, all editorial colleagues with Gen, and four very distinguished guests who I'll introduce in just a couple of minutes. The title of today's episode is Gen 40, Looking Back and Thinking Ahead. Gen celebrates its 40th anniversary this year. The magazine has literally written and told the biotech story for the past 4 decades, with COVID-19 vaccines paving the way, CRISPR's Nobel Prize, and dramatic advances in gene therapy, neuroscience, regenerative and personalized medicine. The future of biotech looks very bright indeed. So today our thought was to survey the current state of biotech using Gen's 40th anniversary as a sort of a convenient hook and try to assess where the industry is heading with our four very special guests. We're delighted and thrilled and honored to be joined by Lee Hood, the founder of the Institute of Systems Biology and really a legend in the history of biotechnology. Rachel King, president and CEO of Glycomimetics. Sheila McHale, the CEO of Ask Bio, now part of Bayer, and Gil van Bokkelen, the CEO and chairman of Athersys. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
We will start bombarding you with questions in just about 2 minutes or so. A quick word about our sponsor of today's Gen Live. It's brought to you by Gen Edge, Gen's new premium multimedia subscription channel. Gen Edge delivers in-depth news, analysis, and interviews with exceptional researchers and executives driving the future of biotechnology. Gen Edge offers a guaranteed 60-day free trial before you commit to a subscription. And next week, Gen Edge will be hosting its first Zoom Live discussion modeled very much on this kind of conversation, hosted by Alex, featuring Brad Longcar and Charmaine Chan, discussing the recent JP Morgan healthcare conference and the current business outlook of the biotechnology industry. So we hope you will join us for that. Visit www.genedgenews.com and look for the Gen Edge tab where you can read some of the trove of stories we published over the last year and consider taking out a trial subscription. So my three co-hosts are primed and ready to bring our special guests into the conversation. I think, John, we're going to start with you, and I know you've got some questions lined up for Lee Hood. So over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Dr. Lee Hood, thank you for joining us. And also thank you for doing the keynote thought leader article in our January issue, which is a special issue. Alice, you want to hold that up? Show everybody.
There you go. Sure.
It was a special
Here in the
January
front,
issue. And
Lee's on our cover.
it was about where biotechnology has come from and where it's going. Dr. Hood, you've been around from the beginning. And my first question is, when you began your career at Caltech in 1970, what did you see as the main challenge for biology and medicine, and how did you decide to address it?
The main challenge I saw at that time was the enormous complexity of human biology. And what I was convinced is that complexity could only be attacked by generating enormous amounts of data. And one of the first endeavors I undertook at my career at Caltech was to develop a series of 4 instruments, beginning with automated protein sequencing, where my real expertise at that time lay. And these instruments, the automated protein and DNA sequencer and protein and DNA synthesizers, really gave us the tools that laid the foundation for modern biology through Applied Biosystems, a company that I helped co-found and get started and so forth. But the idea was these instruments for the first time gave us the ability in individual humans to generate enormous amounts of data And in many senses, it was the beginning of the whole era of big data in modern biology.
So based on this knowledge, what led you to found the Institute for Systems Biology? And can you define what systems biology actually is?
I can. Well, it was a series of steps. I got engaged with the Human Genome Project, and that gave us the ability to analyze human wellness and disease in the context of genetic variation. That was an enormously important endeavor for thinking about healthcare and getting data for systems thinking. And a second endeavor was that I was really convinced that to fuel biology, the optimal environment would be a cross-disciplinary environment where you had right next door biologists and chemists and computer scientists and engineers and the like. And Bill Gates helped me create that at the University of Washington. And I went up there with the idea of building on top of that cross-disciplinary framework, which turned out to be extremely successful, the idea of systems biology. And I'll just say parenthetically, it was really difficult to get a brand new idea, which was systems biology, started in an institution that had a bureaucracy that was really honed by the past and kind of just barely got by the present, but thinking about the future was hard. So I resigned and started the Institute of Systems Biology in 2000. And the vision there was quite simple. It was for the first time to start thinking about how we could take a holistic view of biological problems or medical problems. And that involved, one, generating a lot of data, as I said earlier, but two, really importantly, it involved converting that data into knowledge, and the knowledge was the biological networks that underpin all of biology. And being able to differentiate networks that became disease perturbed and hence were plate effect factor in disease and from those that are normal and so forth. And we focused on problems in biology and then started thinking about problems in medicine at that time. But the idea was to have data that was global and holistic, that was dynamic in nature, and the key was to be able to integrate these different types of data to mimic the hierarchical nature of organization in a human being. We have molecules, we have cells, we have organs, we have individuals, and we have populations. And we wanted to be able to interrogate data at all of those levels and put them together.
We're going to come back in a little bit to exactly how you did that moving forward. Kevin, pass over to you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, let's bring in, I think, Juliana, and let's bring Sheila into the conversation. Juliana.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Kevin. So Sheila, we cannot have a discussion about the future of biotech without talking about gene therapy, which some say is really experiencing just a huge bloom right now of excitement and progress. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the field and about what your company AskBio is doing. So can you tell us a little bit about how AskBio got started?
Absolutely. First, I want to thank you on your 30th year anniversary. That's quite an achievement. So congratulations to all of you. AskBio was started as a collaboration between researchers and parents. It was based on the work of Dr. Richard Jude Samolsky, who was the first to clone AAV for therapeutic purposes. And the company was started in 2001. It was not a great time to start an AAV gene therapy company. This was shortly after the death of Jesse Gelsinger, and the entire field was shut down. There was no money for gene therapy. In fact, I would go to the investor conferences and it was almost like I had, COVID at the time, right? People were putting 6 feet barriers between me and themselves. They had no desire to learn anything about gene therapy. You think about today when there are so many companies that getting started in this space, it's really quite a change. So as a consequence, we had to start the company in a very unorthodox way. As I mentioned, we were started by parents who had children with devastating disease. These parents really had looked towards traditional medicines to help their children, and they just didn't have any solutions, right? So they were willing to take the risk of investing in something at the time that seemed a little science fiction. And literally, we had parents who did bake sales and relay for life races, lots of grassroots fundraising. And that essentially allowed us to bring in one of our first therapeutics for giant axon neuropathy into the clinic. It's a severe neurological disease. We also worked with the Muscular Dystrophy Association and other philanthropic organizations, and they gave us money. And on the basis of those funds, we were able to advance a therapeutic for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. That therapeutic is now being advanced by Pfizer into pivotal trials with some amazing results. Little boys who can barely go up 4 steps are now going up baseball stadium steps and are back in swimming lessons and Little League baseball, and they have their childhood back again. So it's exciting, but it was really a difficult time in the company's original beginnings. We spun off lots of companies with the attempts of trying to keep the bulk of the IP in our manufacturing processes intact. And so we spun off first Chatham, which was bought by Baxter, now Takeda, to work on hemophilia. And we also spun off our Duchenne's program in a structure called Bamboo that Pfizer bought. As you mentioned, AskBio was recently purchased by Bayer. So we have a new chapter. And the last 3 years, we've made tremendous growth. We're now over 350 people operating in 4 different countries.
Wow. All right, great. Thanks so much. And now I just wanted to ask you a little bit of a personal question, because I've talked to a lot of CEOs of biotech companies, but never one that's a lawyer or has a law degree. So can you tell me a little bit about how you made the move from law to CEO of a biotech company?
Yeah, and it goes back to the company's origins. Dr. Samolsky and I met when I gave a course at the University of North Carolina, where he's a professor on how to start companies and how to get the intellectual property and license it from the university. And he was in the crowd, and he came up to me and he said, I want to start this company. It's going to be difficult because there's not a lot of institutional investors who will back gene therapy, and the field is having some difficulty. And he basically told me, but if we are successful, we will change the world, right? And I tend to be an idealist. I think it's incredible what we have at our disposal in the AAV gene therapy area. We really have made the blind see. We've made the lame walk with Duchenne's. We will make the deaf hear. And so I was, I guess, a little intrigued, and I like a good challenge. And so I have also an MBA, business background and finance background. I have a pretty good understanding of intellectual property. And so my skill set combined with his science skill set sort of made the whole package. And as a lot of people know, when you're in a startup company, you do all the different jobs. And so between the two of us, we could manage we could cover most of the bases. So that's how I transitioned.
Oh, terrific. Oh, that's a great story. So now, just looking back over the last 2 decades of gene therapy, the field of gene therapy, what would you say has been the biggest change that you've seen from, I mean, that's a long time, but from them to now?
We had the opportunity to prove our technology in the clinic, and we've had successes. I think it's like anything else, seeing is believing. Naysayers can be convinced when they see the data and they see the revolutionary results. In our own trials, within a period of just 6 months, we can see substantial difference through biomarkers and through visual observation of people changing functional performance. So, I think about in AAV gene transfer, right? We've demonstrated as a field, and I believe AskBio and our participants have made big contributions to all these different areas. But we've demonstrated that we can deliver to the eye, right, with the Liebers program, and that used Jude's technology that he developed as a postdoc. And Kathy High, who we recently announced joined our company, Dr. Hai was, of course, the founder of Spark and was instrumental in advancing a lot of programs into the clinic and the first AV approved drug onto the market. We've gone into the CNS, right, with SMA. And of course, that uses Jude's self-complementary technology. We've been in the liver with hemophilia. And again, Kathy has made big impacts there. And then skeletal muscle tissue, which is near and dear to my heart because I spent 20 years working on this drug. But now we've shown that there is hope for Duchenne's patients, and hopefully the drug will continue to do well in pivotal trials, and we'll be able, again, to give more hope for young boys that are suffering from this illness.
Thanks, Juliana. And Sheila, can I pass the microphone over to Alex? And let's welcome Rachel King from Glycomimetics. Alex, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Rachel, thanks for coming on. I guess.
Sure, my pleasure.
Yeah. What got you interested in the biotech industry as a career and professional, let alone heading Glycomimetics?
Well, I was one of those kids, in high school and even before high school, I was just fascinated by biology. I mean, I had a microscope and a dissecting kit when I was still in high school and was always collecting things and trying to understand more about the biology around me. Just fascinated by biology. For a number of reasons, I ended up going a different path when I got into college and went to business school. But I was fortunate in an early job at Bain & Company, the management consulting firm, to work on a project where we were doing some work for one of the early biotech companies that was in Boston. And I thought, there's an opportunity to actually combine what was my developing skill set in business with this real interest I'd always had in biology. So that was the starting point, and have just continued to follow opportunities that have allowed me to do both of those things.
Great. And with a State of the Union address usually delivered around this time each year, what's your take on what would you say is the state of biopharma today?
Well, I think, of course, we've had a very good year in the past year from a financing perspective. That's been exciting. But I think perhaps the most remarkable thing, really, I would say, in terms of the state of the industry is what the industry collectively, and not just the industry, but also the academic community, the policy community, what we've all collectively achieved in terms of addressing the pandemic. I think that speaks to really the bringing together of some of the really fundamental work that Dr. Hood did in terms of understanding the complexity of biology that positioned us to be able to bring these tools and data together, combined with the policy work of a program like Operation Warp Speed that really gave a particular financial and policy push to support the industry. I think we're going to look back on this year as one of our really proud moments in biotechnology in terms of what we've been able to contribute to addressing this pandemic.
On the pandemic, how and why, in your view, were the stakeholders, especially in the industry, within the government, able to mobilize as quickly as they did and bring hundreds of new vaccines and drugs? By our count in the COVID-19 tracker, more than 300 in development within a matter of months.
Yeah, it's been amazing. And I see this also from the perspective of a board member of Novavax, which is one of the Operation Warp Speed companies. So I've seen the transformation within that company over this period of time, as well as within the industry. And I think it's a moment in history where we've been able to build on a lot of fundamental science that, thank God, was in place by the time we needed to address this, so that the virus could be quickly sequenced, the sequence could be quickly shared, that sequence could be quickly incorporated into these mRNA vaccines or in other vaccines where the spike protein was expressed and then incorporated as a protein into vaccines. It's just a tremendous foundation that was present to enable the scientific community to come together across all of the ways that we have. And from a policy perspective, and I think this is actually one of the really important innovations as we look back over this number of decades as you celebrate. But from a policy perspective, that we've also done a lot to understand what can be done to really speed up the development of novel drugs, and by looking at surrogates, by doing things that would enable for example, investment in manufacturing through these government programs. Before we knew if the phase 2 was successful, we were investing in manufacturing for phase 3. Before we knew that the phase 3 was successful, companies could manufacture for launch. That kind of stuff, would not have happened without the government support. So I think it's really a unique combination of both the scientific foundation and the willingness from a policy perspective to do what was needed to be done in order to address this tremendous human challenge.
You cite the speed, and I wonder on your sense of how permanent you see the changes wrought by COVID-19, especially in terms of development, and how much faster can these timeframes be going forward, even after this current pandemic?
So, I think we're going to have to answer that question probably drug by drug or indication by indication, because there have been other pivotal moments like this too. When you think about it, when during HIV, when the activists were really pressing for much more rapid approval of drugs, when we began to see increased use of surrogate markers, for example, around approvals, it took some time before that spread beyond HIV. And I think we're still looking now. We're looking at surrogate markers for Alzheimer's disease, but this concept of how can we look at for other endpoints is a really critical one. And I think for the pandemic, I don't know yet what the learnings are going to be of this. Unfortunately, I don't think this is the last time we're going to have to, probably even in our lifetimes, the last time we'll be addressing a pandemic. So I hope that we've learned a lot that we'll be able to bring to bear. So I think the lessons are not yet fully learned, but I think from a public policy standpoint and a regulatory standpoint, I think we've clearly had an opportunity to think through how can we be faster, how can we think about things differently. And that flexible mindset, I hope, is something that we'll retain as we look at the next critical indication in human health.
Thanks, Rachel. I want to bring in our final guest of the four that we've assembled, Gil Van Bocklin. Hi, Gil. You can take yourself off mute. Gil, welcome to you. I know you contributed a column or an op-ed in the Gen first issue of 2021, so it's great to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be part of the event.
Yeah. So speaking of anniversaries, and John's back with us, but I'll ask his first question while he just gets, make sure he's plugged in. You've just celebrated your company's 25th anniversary, right? Athersys, I believe, was established back in 1995. So I know John wanted to ask, what was the perceived need and mission for the company back then? And how are you doing in hitting those objectives?
Yeah, so in the early days, it was a team of us that came out of Stanford Medical School primarily, including several of us that had done our graduate work there, and it also included several faculty members. And we had a common vision. We wanted to focus on areas where there were significant challenges in clinical medicine. Some of us had considered pursuing a career in clinical medicine, but we felt like we might be frustrated if we had to tell patients that we couldn't help them, or there wasn't a solution for the things that were really ailing them or creating, in some cases, life-threatening situations. So it was around that common vision that the company originally got started. And originally, the team of us came out here to Ohio to work closely with some of the leadership at Case Western Reserve University Medical School, which is just right up the street from where our company is located. And we didn't really intend to stay, but we did, and we're awfully glad we did. We've been here now for about 25 years, and I'd say we've been very true to our mission to focus on big impact areas. If you look at our two pivotal programs, they're focused on stroke, and the second program is focused on treating acute respiratory distress, which includes COVID-19 induced acute respiratory distress syndrome. And then we have some other programs behind that. But really, it's all about not trying to make incremental changes. It touches on some of the things that Sheila mentioned and some of the things that Rachel mentioned, and also Dr. Hood, which is having a big impact in areas where there's significant definable unmet medical need.
So tell us about the state of regenerative medicine. Where are you seeing the most medical promise, I guess I would ask?
Yeah, well, I think first it's really worth pointing out that 2020 was a record year for the sector as a whole. We saw about $20 billion invested into the regenerative medicine sector. And regenerative medicine, broadly defined, includes cell therapy, gene-modified cell therapy, or immunotherapy approaches are a good example of that, as well as tissue engineering. And a lot of people have asked, well, why is there so much interest? Why is there so much excitement in the area now? And I would say it's really a reflection of the fact that this sector, Sheila was telling a story that frankly, it really resonated with me that if you go back 15, 20 years ago when we were in the dark days of what was going on in the gene therapy space, and regenerative medicine, frankly, wasn't even a broadly utilized term, people were staying away in droves for lots of understandable reasons at the time. But if you fast forward to where we are now, you're looking at a sector that has well over 1,000 companies. We've got over 1,200 clinical trials. The vast majority of those clinical trials are in late stage of development. So we've got approaching 700 phase 2 trials that are ongoing, and we've got more than 150 phase 3 or pivotal studies that are ongoing. And I think the reason why people are so excited, and Sheila mentioned this, is because there's more and more evidence that shows that a lot of these technologies, a lot of these therapies are working. And so that data, those clinical results, the exciting impact on areas of substantial unmet medical need that are refractory to traditional clinical approaches drives a lot of interest. And that interest ultimately drives investment. And that investment represents the fuel that allows us to complete those clinical trials and then see these therapies advance to the point where they can become part of the medical arsenal, if you will. So I'd say it's a combination of emerging data, a lot of investment that's occurred over time, but a successful advancement to later stage clinical development, and also the growing recognition that these technologies can really focus on areas where traditional approaches just have not really made much of a dent, if you will.
And how much of regenerative medicine is really pushing towards increasing longevity?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and we actually even here at the company have this debate. A lot of people out there are focused on trying to increase lifespan, right? Yeah. Some people that have prognosticated that you can really push the limit on that and take it out to some extreme numbers, if you will. Our focus is really not on that. And I think the field more broadly defined, I think it will translate to an impact on a longer, healthier lifespan. But I think the emphasis is really going to be on quality of life. So improving clinical outcomes so you can dramatically improve the quality of life, lessen the dependence on institutional care or home health care, or having to deal with limitations that in some cases might be lifelong issues. For example, Sheila could speak to this with some of the pediatric indications and the successful gene therapy approaches. Really, if you can change those situations so that children can live a normal, healthy life, and people that are afflicted with a whole host of different indications that have been problematic for a long time, if you can make a difference in those areas and improve quality of life, and also do it in a value-centric way. Rachel is somebody who's been an active board member at the Bio organization for a long time. We spend a lot of our time talking about strengthening and presenting the value proposition and how we actually deliver therapies and help define those therapies in the context of the human impact, the clinical impact, but also the value proposition, if you will. And I think that's a big part of what the regenerative medicine sector is all about.
Great. Thank you so much. We're getting a bunch of questions in. We'll come to those in just a second. I wanted to just go back to Lee for a minute. Lee, of course, you were talking about personalized medicine and indeed P4 medicine, I think a term that you coined. I don't know if that was even before the completion of the Human Genome Project. It was certainly way before most people were talking about the future of precision medicine. But I'm curious because one of the companies that you established a while ago to really deliver that, or it's at least it seemed to me to try to deliver that, Arivale, wasn't able to succeed. I wonder if you could maybe just talk a little bit about where we are in the delivery of P4 medicine, and was there anything that you were able and your team were able to learn about why Arivale didn't flourish the way I'm sure you had hoped? Was it a good idea just a little bit too soon?
So, well, those are a series of interesting questions. So I would say what I'm really interested in is wellness for everybody, not just the initially disadvantaged. And I'm really interested in healthy aging. And one of the reasons we started Arivale was to be able to demonstrate formally that if you took a quantitative analysis, so for each individual, and we had 5,000 of them, we had a genome sequence, we measured every 6 months, 1,200 blood analytes, we measured the microbiome, we had a Fitbit and did all the quantized self-measurements. What we demonstrated beautifully in Arivale was each of these 5,000 unique individual data clouds, when analyzed, led to an independent set of what we called actionable possibilities. And these were features we got from the literature that if the individual acted upon them could improve wellness or let them avoid disease. And Aravale unequivocally was able to demonstrate what we called scientific or quantitative wellness, that it worked beautifully. But the other thing Aravale did that was equally spectacular is when we analyzed these data clouds, so 5,000 data clouds over 4-year periods or so, we were able to demonstrate 3 really striking things. So, well, scientific wellness did work, but we were able to calculate by binning all 5,000 people into 10-year categories, 21 to 30, 31 to 40, 80 to 90, 81 to 90. We could create an algorithm that gave you your biological age, the age your body says you are, rather than your chronologic age. And what we demonstrated with the Aravale population is every year you were in this program, if you were a man, you lost a year of biological age per year of chronologic age. If you were a woman, you lost 1.5 years. And we don't really understand those differences. But the really important point is the younger your biological age is from your chronologic age, the better your aging. So we demonstrated with 40 different diseases, in every case, individuals had biological ages significantly higher than the chronologic age. And the other thing we could do is make a global measurement about your biological age, but we could focus in on major organs and get organ biological ages now. And we've actually put this into a company that has been acquired recently called Longevity, and all of this will be available in a few months to ordinary people. The second thing that was third thing that was really striking is we saw 167 wellness to disease transitions in the 5,000 people over 4 years, going to all the major chronic diseases. We looked in detail at 5 that had transitioned to cancer, and for each one, we were able to demonstrate there were outlier analytes way outside the norm for the population we had at that point in time, that if they were proteins, could give us insights into the disease-perturbed network that was causing the disease, and give us insights into the disease that would come. We were able to go back 4 years, and for all of those show we had not yet reached the first time point when the outliers began. So cancer starts 5 years, 6 years, 7 years before. But what we hope to be able to do is to use these biomarkers to say, this is a pancreatic cancer transition, and then to look at the networks at the earliest transition point, develop therapies and reverse them. So it's a predict and prevent strategy that I think is going to transform healthcare in a major way.
That's fantastic. Well, let's move on to some audience questions. And Juliana and Alex, please look through these and either take one or go. I'm going to take the 2 together, and then Juliana, I'll come to you because these are 2 sides of the same coin. Shuli asks, what do you see as the next sets of new and transforming technologies for biotech? What do you see the future of biotech in 5 to 10 years? And Jonathan asks a slightly more focused question: which technologies or diagnostics or treatments will be able to move to the specialist or primary care physician's office within the next, say, 5 years? So Sheila, why don't I start with you? Take one or both of those.
Yeah, sure. I still think gene therapy has a long way to go. We're just at the beginning. I think we'll see more AV gene therapy drugs. I think we are overcoming some of the obstacles in terms of the immune response and redosing. We actually are going to be moving a redosing regimen into the clinic this year. And I think that's important because we don't want to treat, little boys or little girls, and then they would lose the transgene over time and lose the benefit of the drug. So I'm very excited about that. I think gene editing has a lot of prospects. We just got into the clinic as a field in the eye and are seeing some benefits there, but there's a lot more we can do with gene editing. And when used in conjunction with things like AAV, it's a broader array of diseases that we can transform. So I'm very excited about that. And of course, RNA drugs they have come a long way and they continue to make great progress. And I think there's an opportunity for all of these different technologies to coexist and to treat a wider range of diseases and be used in different select areas. So it's a very exciting prospect for the future.
Great. Rachel, why don't we ask same questions for you?
Yeah, so I'll morph it a little bit. I think that Sheila's made some interesting points about the technologies. And I think another interesting development is likely to be how and where the technologies are applied. And this gets to some of what Dr. Hood was saying a moment ago, that we'll be looking at disease categories in a much more precise way. And rather than treating these people, we'll be treating just these people. So we'll be able to apply our technologies in a much more focused way to a more targeted group of patients who are more likely to benefit from that specific approach. So I think that innovation is likely to come not just in the technology platforms themselves, but how specifically they're applied to people most likely to benefit from a particular approach.
Thank you. Gil.
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think that the next 5 years are going to focus around a couple of key themes. First, I think gene therapy and cell therapy is going to go mainstream, and you're going to see a lot of really compelling examples of those becoming clinical realities and the interventions of choice for a lot of people that have historically had nowhere else to turn, and clinicians have been intensely frustrated by that. So I think that's going to be one of the major transformational areas. I also agree with what Rachel was just talking about in the context of, I think the next 5 to 10 years is going to be a big impact window for diseases of aging. So also touching on some of what Dr. Hood was talking about, where you're going to see a lot of things that have been, not everything. There's still going to be some areas that I think are going to take longer to crack. I think some of the really more problematic chronic diseases, we may not really have those figured out. But I do think that there's progress being made in pretty much every area you can point to or think of. And I think there's this huge technological convergence that is occurring on multiple different angles that is really enabling the possibility for transformational treatments, transformational therapies. And so I think that those two things, one in part driven by the mainstreaming, if you will, and the technological advancement of the cell and gene therapy space, and then diseases of aging, which frankly represents a major area for societies around the world, given the unprecedented demographic transition that we've been living through for the past few years, and that's going to continue for the next several decades.
And Lee, you know a thing or two about technology development.
Well, I think there are a lot of technologies. I think one of the most important new technologies is going to be imaging. I think we'll get enormously high resolution imaging, and it's key because to understand biology, you need to understand dynamics in the tissue, in the organism. And we've got lots of little things that are pushing at the edges, but there'll be global breakthroughs there. I think a second big breakthrough is we're going to learn to do the genome sequence plus the analyte microbiome analyses infinitely cheaply. And what I'm pushing now is a 1 million person project over the next 5 years, where we'll have these longitudinal data clouds I've talked about, and we'll apply to those people scientific wellness, healthy aging, the ability to see wellness disease transitions. And another area that's going to be transformational is we now can determine genetic risk for more than 100 diseases. And we're showing now, if you're at a high risk for a certain disease, almost certainly you're going to be treated differently than if you're at a low risk. So all of these fundamental things, and I would say it's a 5 to 10 year period. And what will happen is the payers will all of a sudden realize that scientific wellness and healthy aging and the avoidance of transition to chronic disease are going to save them $1 gazillion. And all of these things will get paid for in an appropriate fashion. And we'll move to a value-based medicine where the payers say to all of the providers, we're only paying you to keep people healthy and well. We're not paying for anything else. And that's going to drive this whole process that I've talked about here. So I think we're all going to be living, and I really agreed with the comment, what we're really driving for in aging is not lifespan, but health span. And we want to make them coincident. And of course, what's really interesting is if you go far enough, you get actually a precipitous drop off and die of complete systems failure. So we want you to be functional right up to the end and drop fast.
Would anyone like to respond to that?
Yeah.
Sounds
well,
good.
I'll actually add something to the point of when Dr. Hood mentioned the payers, because I think that access to healthcare, I ultimately do think that makes sense where we're headed, that ultimately we want payers to pay for health, not for sickness. And I agree with that. But I think between now and there is going to be a very challenging time because a lot of these new therapies are very expensive. And I think there's a major challenge to balance both the social drive for innovation, the need to have policies that support innovation, and the need to ensure that we have policies that really support affordable access, not just access, but affordable access, because we've got a lot of policies right now that because of co-pays and because of the way insurance works, that makes it very difficult for a lot of people to access care that we know they could benefit from if they would get it. So I think that those twin challenges of ensuring on a social level, ensuring both innovation and affordable access are going to be with us in very challenging ways in the coming years.
Yeah, if I could.
Could I add one?
Gil, go ahead. Gil.
Well, I was just going to say, I fully agree with what Rachel was just saying, and I think it's going to require a shift in thinking and some significant advancement on the policy side in terms of coding coverage and reimbursement systems. Right now, we have some very archaic systems that are in place that are very cumbersome. They're very difficult to navigate. They have once in a great period of time kind of entry points, if you will, and they're really not the way the system has historically worked. It's not value centric. It's basically looking through the wrong end of the telescope, I think, on a lot of different issues. And I think that needs to change, and it needs to change sooner rather than later. Now, the good news is that I think a lot of folks are talking about that issue. They're sensitized to it, both on the payer side as well as on the innovator side. But honestly, we can't solve that fast enough. The reality of it is that the more we shift toward that type of thinking, and it also requires innovative thinking on the part of the companies, because companies historically have not really focused on making value-centric arguments. They focus on trying to maximize pricing and then basically increase pricing over time as much as they possibly can. So we have to think differently. We as an industry, I think we recognize that, at least many of us do. And I think we're behaving accordingly. But there's going to have to be some significant changes, I think, that occur in the next several years to help enable the innovation and the uptake and delivery of the innovation in an efficient way.
Thanks, Gil. I want to squeeze in some more questions. Juliana, do you have one for the panel?
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to ask, and it's something in a slightly different vein, and it could go to anybody, but basically, it's biotech has a diversity problem. We see that in the genome sequences that are done, the clinical trial participants, even into the C-suites of companies. So what are your thoughts as biotech leaders as to meaningful ways to really, make change in that area?
So I guess I would like to comment on that. If you look at venture capital, less than 3% go to women CEO companies. If you look at women of color, they get less than 1% of venture capital funding. So I think the odds are really stacked against you. I think it's really change that occurs an individual at a time. I think about in my own company, I have Mexican heritage, and so I feel that I see myself as a woman of color. I think that it just takes people who are committed to diversity. I'm very, I guess, honored and very appreciative of the fact that Jude, throughout the years, stood by me when we were getting bamboo financed. I couldn't get it financed, right? We had animal data 9 years out with dogs that had been treated. Other companies were getting financed, and we ended up, selling the program to Pfizer. He gave me a second opportunity with AskBio, and in 3 years, I basically built the company up to 350 people. We have a CDMO business. We're generating revenues. Our technology has been outsourced to groups like Avexis, Novartis. We raised venture capital, which wasn't easy, and we sold the company in 3.5 years. And I think I have given him hopefully a significant return right on his belief in me and giving me the opportunity. But I think change happens when you have people who are committed to diversity, who say, this is something that's important, and it's so important that I'm going to take the risk and I'm going to make the commitment to individuals who represent diverse individuals. I think it's the only way that happens, quite frankly. And so I'm very appreciative of the fact that Jude gave me the opportunities. And again, when we couldn't get bamboo finance, came back and said, you're doing everything right, and we're going to work through it. So it just takes brave people to make a commitment.
And jumping in with an audience question, if I could, from Stefan. He wants to know, do you think the current viral crisis will have a net positive or a net negative economic impact on the research and development of novel viral delivery therapies, given, and here's another challenge, we talked about reimbursement, we talked about diversity, given public reservations that might arise from misunderstandings about viruses and their risks?
Well, that seems like it's a question that would probably be in Sheila's wheelhouse, but maybe I'll kind of get started on it. First off, just broadly speaking, being an active observer and participant in the regenerative medicine ecosystem, broadly defined, and somebody that keeps a close eye on kind of public reaction to various things, I personally don't sense any kind of increased trepidation towards, and I think there's a pretty clean distinction. People understand the pandemic is separate from the innovative technologies that are being developed, where you have to demonstrate in an appropriate regulatorily defined way safety as well as therapeutic effectiveness. And frankly, one of the disturbing things from 20 years ago is one bad event could cast a black cloud over the entire sector. That's not true anymore, because now I think public understanding, regulatory perspective, clinical understanding, on a lot of different levels has really evolved to the point where people are able to separate those types of events from basically the broader progress that is being made. So I personally don't see it as a big warning bell that is going to create an issue. But Sheila, I happily turn it over to you.
Yeah, I don't think at this point there's going to be any issues. I mean, we basically tell them that we take the virus and we take out all the wild type DNA. It's just a shell. That's all it is at the end of the day. And it's amazing, especially parents who have children that have these devastating diseases. It's incredible how well educated they are. They read all the papers and the literature. Scientifically, they can go toe to toe to people who've been in the field for decades. And so I think where there's devastating disease and traditional medicine has failed, and we show in the clinic that we can address those patients' needs, patients and parents of sick children are very willing to adopt these technologies. We just have to keep demonstrating that we can have success in the clinic. We just have to do our job. And if we do that and keep progressing the science, people will continue to, accept gene therapy.
We have about 10 minutes left in our conversation. If you have an urgent question, please get it in. We'll try and squeeze it in. I want to just bring the conversation back to the big story of the day, which is not Gen Live, but of course the inauguration. And the Biden administration, for the first time, has appointed a science minister at the cabinet level position in the notable form of Eric Lander. What are your hopes for that? If you had Eric's ear, is there something you think is that more than symbolic? What are your hopes for Eric's elevation into the cabinet?
I think it's absolutely a milestone.
Yeah.
I think Eric is infinitely articulate and persuasive. I think he will bring an enormous knowledge and impact of science to Biden administration considerations and so forth. And he's, extremely rational about what is realistic and what isn't realistic. So I can't imagine a better candidate for that position than Eric. And I think he's going to do a superb job. And I would guess for any reasonable administration, science will be in the cabinet from here on out. Because, when you come down to it, virtually all of the problems that we really are struggling with are problems of complexity, and they have to be approached with science. Mm. You can't do it through the gut like Trump tried to do. You're going to fail every time. But I think this is a way of ensuring we'll be superbly positioned to integrate science into all of the challenges we're going to be facing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very exciting. I think it also, I think, clarifies perhaps some of the specific challenges that we have when we have to make, collectively, we have to make policy decisions in which many of the people specifically involved in making the policy are not going to be able to understand some of the scientific details, right. Either the impact or the input into the decision. And so, we have to be able to rely, and this is increasingly a problem in a technologically complex society, that we have to make decisions relying on other people who are experts whom we can trust. And so I think to have someone at that level being able to provide that input is going to be critical.
Well, and I think the other thing is Eric is a master at bringing science down to the level of the layperson. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be a very useful skill.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think back to when I saw Eric give a talk when I was an undergraduate at University of California, Berkeley, decades ago. And it was one of the most impressive talks I think I've ever seen. And you're exactly right, Lee. He did a very good job of bringing down to an understandable level some concepts which at the time were pretty advanced and very complicated. I think sometimes in policymaker land, it gets lost on just how important that is. People that understand very complicated systems or concepts or technologies and basically emphasizing the effective, straightforward communication of what that actually means and what we're doing with that. And I think Dr. Lander is an excellent choice in terms of being able to convey some of those things in terms that a lot of people can relate to and ultimately understand.
We had a question, I thought we would, but we finally did get a question about AI, and it's addressed to Lee, but anyone's welcome to answer it. Lee, you were talking about imaging, and the question, Anil asked if you'd heard of a company called Recursion Pharmaceuticals, but allied to that, what are your thoughts on machine learning and AI being used for drug discovery, and what challenges are there for these drugs to actually be brought to market?
Well, I think AI is going to be one of the critical tools in the future. There's little question about it. And if you see some of the biggest and most aggressive companies out there that are using data, they use hand in hand AI to be able to deal with it. And I can give an example where we're starting to think about it, and that is, we believe that the first example of where we'll be able to detect very early and reverse disease before it gets there is Alzheimer's. Now, it turns out Alzheimer's is an incredibly complicated disease. So what we're beginning to think about now is, can we create a data lake that has essentially all the information about Alzheimer's? And can we take the dense data features of each individual and put it into that lake and use AI to come out with a series of diagnostic recommendations, subtype stratification, and so forth, and appropriate therapeutic explanations in a way that a physician in Walla Walla, Washington could become the equivalent to an expert in Alzheimer's. So that's the vision of what I think AI is going to be able to do in the arena that I'm really interested in. But look, people are repurposing drugs. People are they're discovering new kinds of drugs, and I think it's going to be. Look, the future. I think there are really three things. One is data driven. The second is systems thinking, and I think the third are the analytic abilities to convert data into knowledge. And that is not trivial.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on AI?
Yeah, we use AI in our capsid design and also in our promoter design. So we've been using artificial intelligence now for quite some time. It's helpful in some ways, but you still have to go into animals, right? So it helps us get more variations that we can test, but ultimately we still have to do the testing of going into animals and making sure that what we think the machine learning has told us will really bear out. I think for us, it's still the animal testing, right? The animal testing models are not perfect. I wish we had a better way where when we translate from the animal models into humans, we had fewer surprises. But the immune system of humans is so complex that we haven't been able to replicate that either through, at least to date, through machine learning or AI, or, even non-human primates. There's still this, in terms of our doses of our therapeutics and the immune response, we still get a surprise when we go, often we still get a surprise when we go to humans. And that's the one area, I think, of translation of drugs where I wish we could figure out better models, animal models or testing models or something, where we wouldn't have that big jump.
I think we've only got time to squeeze in one more question, but it's Meg asked, and it's a nice question. Thanks, first of all, to all of you for the excellent discussion. She says her question comes from working in low-income countries to build capacity in science, technology, and innovation. How can the profusion in quite incredible biotech applications today be translated into low and medium-income countries? From Meg. It's a challenge.
Maybe I'll
go ahead. Gil first, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, fundamentally, it's driven through scalability and economic efficiency. If you look at something like CAR-T, where you're kind of at the stage, at the scale of the technology spectrum now, it's one patient by one patient, if you will, with the current therapies that are out there, and they're insanely expensive. But what alleviates that, what shifts that over time, is basically when you're improving the scalability of those approaches, broadening the utility of those approaches, making them more scalable, more kind of off the shelf, if you will, and you take them out of the one-by-one arena. That's basically how you start to drive down the economic efficiency and ultimately your cost of goods and ultimately your ability to deliver it on the broadest basis possible. But let's be honest, it's not an easy thing to solve for. This is why we see healthcare innovations start in the more economically well-off parts of the world, and then ultimately they basically translate through other ecosystems and into other economic environments basically over time. I don't think there's a magic wand that you can use to solve for something like that, but I do think technology and efficiency ultimately drives that, and I think it will continue to do so. And I think a lot of what Lee was talking about, which is, look, as we improve our understanding and we increase our efficiency by leaps and bounds on a lot of things, and as we improve our scalability, that's what gets us closer and closer to kind of a global delivery or a global democratization, if you will, of healthcare technology and innovation.
I think the most fundamental aspect of globalization is science education. I think you have to start with science education in these countries, and you have to have young people that are coming out that know what science is and can think about it, and so forth. And the Gates Foundation has done really a marvelous job at pushing that in Africa and so forth. But I think no matter how efficient we are, if you don't have people who understand about science, physicians who understand about science, it's going to be hard to convince them to take on things they have no idea about. But if we have this elementary education where people have a real sense of what science is, and it'll push them into professions in science too, I think that is absolutely paramount.
I think it's
Rachel.
not just public health too, or it's not just technology, but also public health. Because if you think even of something like the vaccine is cheap relative to this very expensive complex gene cell therapy. You know, we're talking $20 a dose in the developed world, and so even that is too expensive for the developing world. So when you think about something that's cheap and hopefully very effective, and how challenging it is to ensure equitable access to that, I think we really see what we're up against. So I think we're going to need policy innovations too. Like again, the vaccine, the pandemic is a good example of the COVAX facility that was put together, which is attempting to be a distribution mechanism to the developing world. So we'll need policy innovations on the public health front as well.
Thank you.
Just to build on what Rachel said, I think it's amazing that we're still distributing drugs in glass vials with rubber stoppers. I mean, we have technology available today to make the storage of our therapeutics where we can avoid negative 90 degrees Celsius cold chain storage. And so developing some of those therapeutics for vaccines and AV therapeutics and other drugs, I think is an essential step to getting drugs distributed throughout the world, including the developed world.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
I'm going to have to run.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, we're closing up now. I know you've all got day jobs and other things. So thank you to Lee, Hood, Rachel, Sheila, and Gil for joining us today. And thanks for all of your contributions for the biotech community. I hope everyone watching will join us next week for Gen Edge Live and next month for another episode of Gen Live, where I suspect we'll be talking about COVID vaccines and genomes and all that good stuff. Thank you all for watching. For the entire Gen Live team, Juliana, Alex, and John Sterling, who is missing in action, probably chewing out an internet provider, I suspect. I'm Kevin Davis. Thank you again for your participation, and goodbye for now.
Pleasure.
Why, thank you.
Thanks very
so
much.
much.